Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kurt Rotnowski, the chairman of the Greater Education Council of Connecticut, back again with part of our ongoing series of interviews with people around the state who are involved in various causes and issues that are dedicated to fixing the mess. And we all know about the mess. So education continues to be a major battlefield, and certainly an important player that we all need to know about is today's guest, Danele Rhoads. I'm just going to jump in with some simple questions, and then we're going to get into the issues. So, hi, Danele.
Hello. I want to correct you. It's Danele.
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 Okay.
It's tricky.
Yes, right.
Yes. It's like Danielle, but not.
All right. So Danele.
Danele. Danele.
So Danele.
Mm-hmm. That's me.
Got to get the accent on the right syllable. All right. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right. So we have talked in the past.
Yeah.
We've had some very long conversations. So I would like to just start with the obvious. If you could tell people what your background is, you know, and how you came to all of this, and then we can get into the good stuff.
Sure. So, like many others, I was living my life normally until 2020, and my kids went online, and I observed a classroom experience with my daughter, and she was asked to confess how she had been racist, which was shocking, but is particularly shocking because we were in a Catholic setting. And I thought that was very objectionable. And that's when I realized, well, wait, something has changed. Wait just a minute. And so basically from that moment on, when I saw my daughter's reaction, her friends' reactions, we just moved forward working with our school. And fortunately for us, our school was completely unaware that that was going to take place, had taken place, very apologetic. We spoke directly with the instructor also at some point, and I think it was a well-intended but misguided attempt to try to kind of go with the current trend. You know, he was like, oh, well, this is happening in the news, and I should do something more. And so he had read what is it called? D'Angelo's book on white fragility.
Right.
And in that, she sort of goes through this struggle session process, and he thought, oh, what a great activity for my class. But, you know, a bunch of 15, 16-year-old kids just like, what is this guy talking about? And then he kind of professed his own racism because he hadn't included enough about this topic in a moral decision-making class, which I felt like he had overthought it a bit.
Yes.
You know.
Right.
So anyway, I spent a lot of time researching. Well, wait a minute. What is going on here? Trying to better understand where D'Angelo is coming from. I read Kendi's book. I interacted with some intellectuals like that are studying this from all different perspectives. And I was looking for a way to really be active and try to make sure this didn't happen to another child. And I found FAIR eventually. First I worked with a few small little groups, and then certainly I've always been active in my own board of education, even though my kids were at the Catholic school. Just that's how my money was spent, and I felt it was important to provide the best education for everyone. Anyway, when FAIR was introduced in the spring of 2021, and that's for those that don't know what that stands for, that's the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And it's a national group that is basically just trying to bring back some Martin Luther King principles to our way of approaching race. Certainly, we believe there is racism. We believe there are inequities. We recognize those things. We don't want to pretend like that's not happening in some contexts, but we also don't want to paint America as a racist place. I mean, we just don't believe that. I don't think that's true. There's lots of evidence that shows you that that's not the case. I mean, even this movement kind of shows you that that's not the case, that you could insist on these things. So.
I just want to interject that you used the phrase struggle session. You know what that comes from, right?
I do, yes. I mean, you know, I think that Mao used these.
That's right.
I think that probably is rooted in Marxism. I don't know the history quite as well as I ought to, probably. I've got enough recent history of my own
Sure.
to be able to see what it is. And it's very difficult to believe that, you know, as a sort of like light person, I'm walking through life, like living my life, just loving everything about my life, feeling very grateful. And then to understand that there's this undercurrent of discontent with our country was like first sort of
so that
surprising
came as
to
a
me.
shock. Okay.
Well, I don't know if it came as a shock so much as it was disappointing. Like, you know, I have people in my life that have been telling me this for years, like my own husband, frankly,
Yes.
has been telling me for many years, we shouldn't send our children to college. They're indoctrination centers. Meanwhile, he's a college professor. And I literally thought, man, you're like,
Out there.
well, you know what I actually thought? I really thought, well, I'm one of 9. We were not a wealthy family. You have your own struggles if you're one of 9 and you come from a family like mine. You know, we've got multiple divorces, et cetera, et cetera. I have been on welfare, for instance. I was one of the kids in line with that blue ticket getting my milk and being sometimes tormented about it. So I suppose I understand poverty in a way that I thought my husband was not understanding that. To me, college was the way out. I didn't see any other way but education getting me out. So I kind of resented that sentiment for a very long time. Then I went to college myself. I was disappointed actually at the rigor. And I went to a very good school, but I still thought,
What'd you study?
well, I'm an accountant, so
okay.
I went to school for accounting.
Right.
And so I have a business degree in accounting. And but even in, you know, like in my philosophy classes and even in my literature classes, some of them were good, but like there was just like, I kept thinking like, this is it? Like, really? Even in my stat classes, like even in math, I was scared to death because I had graduated high school in 3 years. I had skipped a grade to get a job because it was that, or I had to move out. It's, you know, this is how bigger families operate. Sometimes it was time for me to move on, get my own place. And so I thought, oh no, math is really going to be my downfall. But even in those subjects matters, I felt like it was kind of like mildly, until we got to finance, and then I will say kudos to the finance majors.
Oh, okay, right.
The math got more serious and more challenging. Right?
So discounted cash flows and stuff like that kind of
Correct,
started
yes,
to throw
but-
you a little bit.
Yeah, but
Okay,
well, no, not that. It was more like the underlying formula for various different iterations of sort of like financial modeling.
Okay, well,
So that was like a bigger thing to me. I mean, you don't lose me quite at standard deviation.
Okay, yes,
but
that's easy to understand.
yeah.
So,
yeah. So anyway, I thought like for a long time, I just thought how dare they, like, why are they calling these places indoctrination center? And I was one of those kids that when I went to public school, I did feel safer sometimes. You know, there were periods in my childhood where it was not a great place for me to be at home. I understood like that lunch was really important. So there are a lot of ways that I am empathetic to some of the challenges of, I don't know what it is to be a person of color, obviously, but I certainly know what it is to be poor. And I certainly know what it is to be a minority in that it was like my family and one other family. Everybody knew who was getting the free lunch. Everybody knew who the freeloaders were. So my whole generation, all of my family members, all my siblings have worked very hard to kind of like get that off of us, right?
You know, and it's funny because you find others who are perfectly comfortable with that. At the last Greater Education Council meeting, we had someone who was talking about the attitudes of people on welfare in New Haven, and they're perfectly happy and comfortable with being on welfare.
Well, I think if you're in a situation you don't see a way out, your option is hate yourself or like think that's okay and this is my life and this is how I'm going to live it. You know, I think there's a lot of internal justification that goes on. And so, you know, I do understand why that could become a way of life, especially when the incentives are messed up. You know, if we're making it so hard for people to get off of welfare, it's like, I mean, why are we hating the people? We should be hating the system that makes it so, you know, it's so either easy to be on welfare or very difficult to get off. But I mean, there have been some great programs to help people get education and sort of move out of those scenarios. And I think that more programs like that I would be in favor of. And I think that I mean, you know, if you imagine yourself being born into that, not knowing anything, it's only knowing what you see there. I mean, I have 3 children, so they're born into like a state of nature, right? Unless you domesticate them, unless you say, actually, no, you cannot smack your sister on the top of the head and take that Lego out of her hand, that's not acceptable, right? Likewise, you can't expect somebody that's born into impoverished situation where they know nothing of work, like that's not what their family does. What their family does is they, you know, maybe will store up their credits, and they might trade some of the well, in our day, it was actually food stamps. They might try to like get the food stamps and trade that for something that was like a service. And so you start to manipulate the circumstance, the situation that you're in. I mean, it's like a form of, we all always resort back to the same old thing, just bartering. You know what I mean? Like whether it's food stamps or whether it's money. But anyway, I think I can understand it, but I also think in today's society, because we have such access to another way of life, I mean, every kid has a cell phone, pretty much. Not all kids, but many kids have cell phones. Certainly all parents do. If you're on welfare, you can still get a phone. In fact, the phones are often given to people so that they can apply to jobs, all with good intentions.
Obama phone, yes.
But the point is that they see what's going on in the world. So I feel like when I was young, we didn't have that kind of access, right? So it was harder to see the way forward. I mean, thankfully, my older brother showed me. But now I think we have to, you know, take responsibility for making those bad choices. And, you know, I agree completely with Ian Rowe, who is in service of agency. You know, we need to have expectations of each individual human to have their own agency over their own lives and their own choices, and own those. And that will, you know, that's the way, to me, and I think to many others, to solve the problem. But if it was that easy to solve, we would have done it a long time ago. It's very complicated, it's complex
So I'm hearing,
situation.
So I'm hearing 3 large themes. I'm trying to see if there's some fit here. So the 3 things I'm picking on are your experiences in poverty, what you experienced in college, and the shock of what happened in 2020 with the kids. Okay, so I mean, the reaction to telling the kids they're racist was, you know, bad in and of itself, but I'm wondering what influence, because you reacted in a way that other people did not, okay?
Right.
All right? So it was something about your background, your makeup, that made you react. So I go back to 1, what you experienced in college, and 2, your upbringing and how you went through poverty, and trying to decide if those would have been factors here that would have, you know, contributed to your becoming more active.
Well, certainly, you know, we all come with our life experiences, and I think mine added to that. I also think, you know, the Irish like to fight.
Okay, yes, all right.
You know, to survive in my family, you had to either get out of the way, or you had to have a bit of a personality. And so I suppose I have a bit of a personality in that way, or just persistence and dedication. And because I had to, my parents, for instance, did not go to college. They didn't graduate high school. We're the first generation to do so. I had no navigation of that whatsoever. My brother my sister went to college. I have 2 older siblings, but she knew she wanted to be a teacher. And at the time, my mom's second husband was very supportive, and he kind of helped with my mom. My mom's a very brilliant woman, but was not educated. So they went through those steps. But by the time they got to me, I just was on my own. I mean, frankly, literally on my own. My mom had moved out of state. I was living in an apartment, working 3 jobs, and it was time for me to go to college. And I had my brother's experience because he did it kind of on his own, although our church gave him a scholarship and got him started. But anyway, I think that knowing that being persistent, working hard, and then getting the payoff is something I want my children to learn, and I want other people to learn. And also, I think, you know, I didn't expect to talk about my childhood at all. It's a strange
Are you kidding
way that
me?
we
It's right there, your bio.
I guess, but that I never really include my childhood as part of my bio. I think my bio is like, I don't know, it's kind of like more, there's credentials there, right? So I think, oh, we'll talk about that. But I'm happy to talk about this. It just taken me off guard. I have like,
Right, well,
I'm going out of order,
You know,
sorry to the
that's okay.
audience.
I'm guilty of looking at a person's life as sort of a continuum, a smooth flow of events and experiences and ideas and realizations that bring you from one place to the next. So that's why I would look at something like this and say there's something here that was clearly the preceding influence that started you off.
Well, I mean, one thing might be, I haven't really thought about it in this context, but the other family in our town happened to be black, and we were friends with them. So I won't call their names out, but you know who you are.
Right, okay.
So it could be that I had those early relationships with I mean, in our town there were two
Okay.
black families,
Right.
and on different sides of the track. My
Okay.
sister was friends with
Not
one.
this. What town was this?
No, but like one was in the middle class,
Yes,
and one was
no,
not in the. They were
Working poor.
they were foster kids actually. So their home was fine, but there were 5 of them. There were a lot of us, right? So we had that bond. And anyway, my younger sister was friendly with the other family, and my brothers and I were just I don't know, it was like the ages, these were the kids that we were friends with. And anyway, they struggled in ways, and kind of like we spent time like walking on the railroad tracks. My mom used to say, go outside, go play on the tracks, right? And I used to like
play
now,
on the tracks?
yes, she used to say that.
What?
I realize now she was being sarcastic.
Okay.
But at the time, we would put pennies on the railroad tracks. We would
Oh,
literally
sure.
go and play
Okay.
on the tracks because, I don't know, there wasn't that much to do in our town. It's a small town in New Jersey, in South Jersey. And a lot of time this family was with us. And so we would spend time just talking about like what their life was before they had been in this foster and then adopted into this home, and kind of what their struggles had been. And one of my mom's second husband was quite abusive and an alcoholic and a drug addict, and so we had some things in common that you wouldn't necessarily, to look at us, right? You might
Right.
not know
Exactly.
that or see that.
Exactly.
And so I guess my sense of humanity, of us all being one race, struggling against a very brutal, in some ways brutal life, especially as a young kid, that really imprinted on me that it didn't matter what color. It never even came into my consciousness really, other than if somebody else pointed that out to us as we're interacting, like,
Right.
then it just didn't occur to me, right? So I think I understood that. They understood where I was coming from.
I will tell you that I too did not become what I would call race aware until I was into my 20s.
Yeah. Well, I was quite young, but that's typical as we live kind of sort of segregated. That's self-segregation, I think, in a lot of ways. But if you don't have that experience, then you wouldn't. You maybe would believe the stereotypes, or you would think that you're so different, or you would think you're so advantaged. So, I did see some racism with that family. It was very hard for us to. We would come to their defense, right? And it was always my mother, to her credit, was always, do not judge a book by its cover. I mean, she was always very open and welcoming to any race, any religion. My mom went through a lot of cycles of different religions. I've been to temple. I've been to every kind of. I've been to mosque. I've been everywhere there is to be in terms of religion. So I think that also kind of opened me up to like, hey, we're all just trying to figure it out. And so
Well put.
FAIR was a perfect fit for me. But to be honest, what happened to me is as I got older and further away from those relationships, unfortunately the one, Paul, who I was closest with, he committed suicide
My goodness.
at a pretty young age. I think I was 17, no, he was 17 and I was 15 when that happened. So also that had a huge impact on me. Anyway, I think that relationship obviously had to end, whether I liked it or not. And then as I moved through life, it was a matter of who I was interacting with, and I wound up managing America's Best Contacts and Eyeglasses in Chicago. And I worked on the south side of Chicago.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
And in Evergreen Park, hello Evergreen Park people.
Right.
There will probably be very few watching this interview, but it's pretty much I was the only white person there, and I did have to be escorted for my lunch, and my employees had weapons, and it was an interesting time for me to learn a whole nother aspect, an urban environment, which I had grown up in a very small suburban, kind of rural space.
Right.
So that was in my early 20s, and then when I went back to school for accounting, and I had then again different interactions with different people of color. So what was jarring to me is I saw all the people that I interacted with. Obviously, Paul did not succeed, right? But his siblings did. There are other people. I had an employee that was stabbed to death, Stephen, and he was such a sweet kid. It was horrible. It was clear he was on drugs. I still let him come to school, come to work. He came one time with no shoes on, for instance, and I was like,
I don't know.
What's going on here, bud? So he just stayed in the back. I let him do some data entry that day, and it wasn't long before he was killed. So, but his sister became a manager and was very successful, and her children were very. So I had like real life people in my life that had struggled, and some lost and some didn't, and some went on to be really, just leaders in their community.
Right.
And so I know it can be done.
Right.
And I guess like when I hear somebody, the whole notion of bucketing people is upsetting to me.
Right. So I want to cut to the chase on all of this, where I think this brings us then, going back to 2020, all right, is this, the things you've explained now, I think make very clear to me that all of that informed that moment in 2020 when you're listening to how your daughter was having to confess that she was a racist, okay? And this was so jarring. It was such a bad fit, okay, with your own sense of the world that, you had to step into it. So now the question becomes, what comes after that? You explained how they apologized, but now you've moved on to other things as well.
Well, when I realized that was happening on a national scale, I was alarmed because certainly the people of color that I knew would not want this at all for their children. They, there were people in my daughter's class. In fact, we had a girl staying with us that was of mixed race, and she too was faced with that, and it was horrible for everyone involved. And I really objected, not in the like, my poor white girl is going to go through this, and oh my gosh, no, I was angry from the other perspective, like, how dare you do that? Like, that is not who minorities are. I couldn't get my head around the idea that you would, it seemed so demeaning to me. To me, it was the most racist thing you could possibly do.
Right.
I was like, what are you saying to these kids right now? Like, just because you don't understand a culture doesn't make you racist. Like, that's ridiculous. So anyway, I felt it was damaging to everyone, not just to my, my little girl.
You've seen those, what should we say, comments that parents would make at these school board meetings. The black man would stand up and say, my wife is white, and what am I supposed to think? What is she supposed to think? And oh yeah, what are the children supposed to think?
Right.
So I'm going to take a stab at this here as I'm listening to you talk. There are two things that are trying to be married, and they are so incompatible, yet there they are. The first, of course, is this notion that there's this thing called racism, and you can think of it as being omnipresent, okay? And as a liberal, you feel it's your job to do something about it. Okay, now we jump to the second part. Somebody wrote an article making the suggestion that if there's anybody who is hypersensitive, paranoid, lives in the deepest fear of such an accusation as being called a racist, it is, that's right, a liberal. Pumped into education to cover themselves and make it seem like, mine is clean, I'm nothing like that, but you, of course, you're the worst, so we're going to really put it to you.
Well, I think the guilt is real, right? And so I also likewise have a soft spot for people that feel guilty. I think that's kind of good because that means that they're being introspective. The problem I have is when they take their own feeling of guilt and try to put that on society and make guilt systemic, if you will.
Yes.
And guilt is a very damaging thing to have. It's important. It's important so that you can right the ship.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be a
Really?
guardrail. It's not supposed to be the path you walk.
Do you really have to feel guilt in order to address a problem?
Well, not always, but I think it's helpful. It's a cue, right? There's guilt
Yeah.
for a reason. It's like there's anger for a reason too, right? Like I don't like to be angry, and I try not to be angry, but on occasion, something will hit me the wrong way. Like that classroom, I was angry. My first reaction was definitely anger.
Okay, well, it's justified.
so-
as far as I'm concerned, it's
Yes,
justified.
there's something as justifiable anger, but I also think that I'm just saying that guilt can be a vehicle of movement, and I'm okay if that's what you need personally to make you move, to do the right thing. I don't need that. I mean, sometimes I need that. Like,
Well,
I
there's
might want to eat chocolate at night, but I'll feel guilty, so
Okay.
then I won't do that, you know.
Yeah, well, we know
So-
there's this discussion about what's called liberal white guilt. And so there, and I think if you take what has been done with that classroom experience, for example, is a grotesque overreaction,
That's right, yeah.
grotesque, okay, to that guilt. To your earlier points, obviously there's still racism in the country, but, you know, deal with it in a way that's sensible.
Well, I think it's
No.
damaging. That's what has got me going. I think that the overreaction to all of this is so damaging, not just to polite society, but to the very people that I would say they are trying to help, right? Like the liberal idea of we must have equity, for instance, it just backfires every time.
Sure.
I mean, in California, for instance, they had a new policy with mathematics, and
You talking about reparation math?
I don't know what it was called, but I know that not having, basically, if everyone cannot do algebra,
Oh,
let's say in eighth
yes,
grade,
that's right.
then no one's going to do algebra in eighth
Right,
grade.
yeah.
Which is just, that's equity, right? If we all want equity, that's a one way to address equity. Okay, if you can't have it, nobody can have it. I've done that with my own children, right? Like if you're gonna, okay, if there's not enough to share, we're not gonna get the popcorn, for instance. Little things like that. Because maybe it's not popcorn, but if we can't cut up a piece of pizza and there's only one left, that's really what I'm saying is, I don't wanna deal with the real issue, so I'm gonna just not have it. And that's what I think is going on with decisions like that. It's not that they're trying to help the community. It's that they don't want to deal with people saying, hey, we can't do math. Now, the right reaction to why aren't there people of color being able to do that math is to find out why. I mean, instead of just making it equal, let's find out why. I am completely for, I know many way smarter than I am.
Okay, well, I'm gonna-
mathematicians, like
Yeah.
economists,
Yeah.
very, very bright people of color. So I feel like it's so misguided that that it's damaging to the very people in that way. Like the policies that are being made are failing. I mean, that's good news actually, because as we see these things fail, hopefully more people will say, hey, that's already been tried, that's failed. Why would we put more children through that
There's just one
ridiculous
problem.
idea?
There's just one problem. You're being logical. Okay?
Yes.
We know that the people who are causing these problems continue to refuse to admit that they're causing these problems to go on. Okay? And my favorite example comes from this study in homeschooling that involved looking at black homeschooled kids. So I always like telling the story. Forgive me, Dave. You remember it. Yes. So study after study on academic performance based on standardized testing for kids of different ethnicities or races usually goes like this. Asian students, top performers. And year to year, the scoring is rather steady, very mild fluctuations. Then the next level, white. Then Hispanic, and then way down here, black. Now, let's keep in mind that these are standardized scores for public education. Key point. The homeschooled kids, homeschooled black kids, would you care to guess where they came out in terms of performance?
I'm sure much higher.
Asian, black homeschooled, then white, then Hispanic, and then the victim still in public education. I think there's a message there.
Court, I hate to do this to you.
Go ahead.
But I have to, because my husband is a statistician. In
Okay.
fact, he's in education.
That's
This
right.
is
No,
what
I
he
know.
studies.
I've talked with them.
So I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't point out that black families that can and will homeschool, or will and can homeschool,
Right.
are a very different subsection
Sure.
than the people that we're trying to address. Now, I saw a huge increase in homeschool in the, I
Yes.
guess, I think it was just, the numbers I saw were just for the black community,
okay.
not
Really?
BIPOC.
Well, the Connecticut.
So there was, there was an overall
Sure.
boost, but there was
Yes.
a bigger boost in
the black
community.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
that, in some ways, that was exciting to me. By
Sure.
the way, I homeschool my youngest, and I have since third grade, and she is 10th grade, although we did have a trial run in our high school, which I can talk about,
Okay.
how that didn't go very well for us.
What was that trial run for?
She wanted to try high school, and
Oh.
her siblings had gone to a Catholic high school, and I
Okay.
said, okay, you want to try high school? And she didn't want to go to their school. She wanted to, be on her own. She's very independent. And so we tried our public high school. I was thrilled to be able to use my tax dollars once. I was like, yay! It just didn't take for her. And I will say it wasn't totally because the school was disappointing, but there were lots of disappointing things in the school that I kind of thought were going on, but then I had confirmation. And my daughter Eve is very in tune to what I'm doing. Like normally she'd be sitting here in the audience listening, and we'd have a long conversation afterwards about why I said this, why I said that. And so she's intellectually engaged in what's happening
Big.
now,
That's big.
right? So when she went to
Right.
high school, it was a very different experience because she, I think, was in some ways, and I did not want her to be doing this, but I think she was kind of looking for things, indoctrination things, and of course, it was very readily. Her
Easily
first
found.
day, she was asked her pronouns, she was asked what her preferred name was. She did push back in the classroom and was received kind of okay, and the other kids were kind of just like, this is ridiculous, and ignoring. There was one moment of despair I think she had, and that was she really was excited about her AP history instructor, and she thought, oh, Mom, he's not going to, he told us we'll never know his political affiliation, and she said, that's all I want. I just want to learn the history. I'm so excited. This is going to be a great year. And it was, I don't know, a few days in, and all of a sudden,
Nope.
he did a great job. This is the thing, he
Yeah.
just shot himself in the foot. But she came home and she said, I'm kind of joking, but I just need to say this, like, trans doesn't have a country, right? And I was like, what? What? What are you talking about? And she's like, well, in so-and-so's class, there's like, the American flag, and then there's the Russian flag, and then the Chinese flag, and then the trans flag. And I know that's just, right? That's not a country. It's like, holy crow.
Well, there is Transnistria, but yes.
But it was the progressive trans flag, and that was so disappointing to her not because he supported that, because she knew it. And then she was like, well, now I know where he's coming from. I just wanted to I didn't want that to be in the history class. I just wanted to learn AP history.
Yeah, well, there would have been more coming. AP, American history, was rewritten a number of years ago to become much more critical of the United States, and that's putting it mildly. So.
Well, anyway, for other reasons, we withdrew her this week, actually, and it didn't have to do with, it more had to do with the pace. As she said,
Yes,
they
that's
talk
right.
a lot, but they don't say anything. And
Interesting.
so I could just do it from the slides, but like I don't really want to.
That's right.
She was looking for engagement.
So, okay, well, this
you
is
know,
why
didn't get
this
it.
is why homeschool kids are on average 2 years ahead of their peers. So,
Yeah, well, in
yeah.
some ways, but you know, they're still just kids
right.
like
But to
everybody
address
else.
your point, which your husband's point about, should I say, homeschool black families self-selecting out of the system, and they're of course going to score higher. If they were still in the system, they would still be getting those low scores.
Yeah,
They
well,
would be commingled. Okay.
it's hard to tease that out, but it's an interesting idea, and I think that you know, actually, I said this at a conference like 2 years ago. I would love to have funding, if anybody's out there listening, for homeschool studying. The problem, though, and my husband pointed this out to me, yeah, it'd be great to study, you know, if people would participate, number one. That's also a self-selecting thing because homeschoolers want to be left alone. They don't want regulation, particularly in Connecticut. It's the one
Yeah.
state that like it does amazing. They really leave the homeschoolers to their thing, which is welcomed. We don't want any intervention. We don't want any regulations, and we reject all of them. But the other thing is you can't really randomly assign. So, you know, if it's not a randomized controlled trial,
You
then
can't randomly. Oh, you mean
Yeah,
within
because-
that population? You can't.
well, you can't
Yes,
you
right.
can't say, you know, okay, you people homeschool and you people don't. Like nobody's you know what I mean? So it's a very difficult thing to
So what would the
to
study?
prove
What would
and
the study
study.
look at?
And, well, I mean, I would maybe study how those particular families managed it. I think there's access
Okay.
issues. Like, to me, it's all about income.
Mm-hmm.
And so race is a factor because there are other things that inputs to that, right? But to me, really, if there's the disparity in most things comes down to income. And so if we looked at what low income, high achieving black families are doing, I mean, I know people have looked into this. Ian Rowe looks into this, for instance. They are usually they have a husband and wife, right? There's, or maybe not they're married, but the father and mother are together. So, you know, there are some attributes then, and we want to try to make sure that we get that success sequence out to people, and you know, hopefully that will help in all boats will rise, because that same thing applies to poor white people. You know, my parents each are on their third marriage, for instance. So that makes for a very turbulent upbringing. Also, it means like something that's maybe understated, I think, within the black community, or I would say the poor community really, is that they
Okay.
move a lot. Because
Interesting.
and so as you
Okay.
move, and this is
Right.
maybe an argument for Common Core, which I don't agree with.
Yeah, neither me. Nor
But
I.
But
yeah, well,
when
that's-
you're moving around, one thing that happened to me, for instance, I moved around in all of my education in middle school and up, and I did 3 years of high school so I could graduate early. I had to take summer classes. I didn't have a lunch. I took longer classes to make all my credits, but I had to skip geometry in order to make it through.
Okay.
So
All right.
going into calculus with your top level in high school being like algebra 2 and no geometry, I had to take geometry and calculus and some integrated algebra in order to pass.
Okay.
And so I had to work way harder. And I think what happens is like each district in Connecticut will do things in a slightly different sequence, or like the private schools are doing them in a different order. Our Catholic school, there was an option for integrated math where you would do some algebra and geometry. That's 3 years. Then you do pre-calc, and then you're ready for calculus. But anyway, so sequencing matters, not in most things, but in math it certainly matters. And so, you know, I think since we're talking about scores and you know, standardized testing, math is the best tell, in my opinion.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, you know, if you look at that, there's a lot of reasons that are not built into the test why somebody in a different poverty level might not do as well.
Okay.
Military
Oh, yeah.
kids also, they're moving a lot.
Sure.
So they were huge advocates of Common Core. But Common Core is like a beast separate from this, and it is not something I agree with or would suggest
Well,
for anybody.
I'll make my one comment to the audience about Common Core. It was an interview with Bill Gates in 2014, I believe, Bill Gates had said he had put in about $3.2 billion into making Common Core happen. So that meant buying up and buying out every significant institution for public education in the country, which he did. Now, so clearly he had a prominent role. So he would be an obvious choice for an interview. So the reporterette from the Washington Post said, Mr. Gates, I noticed that you have, at the time, 3 middle school age children. They go to the same school you went to, which was the Lake School District. We checked their website. We can't find anything on there about Common Core. So his response was, well, if I had my choices. Pause, ladies and gentlemen. Big pause. Excuse me, you're the father, right? Those are your children, right? So you're the one who decides. What do you mean if you had choices? You choose. You decide. Okay. If I had my choices, I would have them take Common Core. Wait for it, ladies and gentlemen. Drum roll, please. Dramatic pause. Plus a superset. Really? So, superset means extra, added on to what Common Core would be. So this big debate that had been going on about whether Common Core was a floor or a ceiling for education had been pretty much answered in that moment. It had been sold by Mr. Gates as a ceiling, but now we know it was really a floor. Hypocrite and liar all in one breath. That's amazing. So that's my comment on Common Core. Big, fake, phony fraud that it is.
I'll say with the math, I like that they showed different ways to get to the same answer. What I didn't like partial quotients, which most people hate. Everybody loves long division. I understand. But I think it's really great to have different ways of learning something. And partial quotients work, so does long division. So to me, what I didn't like is that they said, okay, this is the way we're doing it now. And I think I think this is a problem with education in general. And I'm not an education professional. I'm just from the outside looking in, watching what's happened over many years now. They follow trends, you know, and that I don't think having trends and using our children as sort of a way to try something out.
I think you mean fads.
Fads, trends, however you want to. It's negative, you know. I mean, there's some simple, tried and true ways of doing things, and every time they try to either shortcut it or try something new, or I think it comes down to money too, because then they can reprint the textbooks, then they have to retrain people. It's very discouraging, and I don't think teachers are thinking of it that way, nor do I think the researchers are thinking of it that way per se, but that is a very negative consequence, or a downstream effect.
Right, so what I see...
all of these weird changes.
Yeah, what I see with this is that when you look at the European systems of teaching math, they seem to be able to imbue a sense of play in terms of how to approach math. We have struggled endlessly to be able to do the same thing and have failed every time. And Common Core was just the biggest example of a failure of that.
Well, you know what I think why that was a failure is because parents couldn't help. It got the parents out. That's one of the if he wanted to put a wedge between the parents and their kids.
Oh, it's math.
That was it, because most people can do their multiplication tables. Most people can do long division. If you have like an 8th grade education, you could do that, no matter how, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when they couldn't help their own kid, then that's first of all, it's discouraging. It makes them feel stupid. And also...
There's one other thing, when the child would cry about not being able to do it.
Yeah, well, then they can't even comfort them because they can't help them. So there's a level of frustration that gets raised in the household. And then what the parents did was say, you're the professionals, you handle it. So they stepped out because what choice did they have? Not all parents, but many parents don't have time to relearn. How do you do partial quotient? I'm a weirdo. I learned it, right? So you can't go by me. But also I was homeschooling at the time. So I thought, okay, some of my kids were in school and they wanted to learn this way. And I just like math. I'm also weird that way.
And I think that comes across.
So anyway, I talk too
Right.
much about math, but
That's all right.
but I think
One of the cornerstones.
yeah, it's very important, and it can be fun if you like puzzles and you think of it that
Mm-hmm.
way. But if you're paralyzed by the fear of it, it's not fun. My mom was literally like afraid of math. I think she
Mm-hmm. Okay.
had this
Sure.
terrible fear that she was not going to be able to do it, that she was missing some genetic code, and I'm the only
No.
one in my family that likes math, I'll say. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Where did
maybe
that gene come from?
I don't
Wow.
know. I don't know. Well, they're all pretty.
You're a mutant.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my brother always said I was the milkman's child. Maybe that was partially true or
geez.
something. I don't know. He was brutal, but
Yeah.
anyway. So we went off track here. I think of what we were trying to talk about, sort of. But
Well,
I
I
think
mean-
education is a huge component to what
Well,
I do.
Yes, and so I mean, this journey into math, I think, illustrates at least one. It's an important aspect, but you would not normally think of math as being politicized, but we know that they've already been doing this. I mentioned the reparations math, and you have these examples where they come up with these word problems that are clearly meant to indoctrinate you in terms of their version of racist thinking. It's very strange,
Yeah.
but this is how they're thinking. So yeah, we got to say something about it and stop it. So let's
Anyway.
jump to the boards of education in Connecticut, because you and Dave were talking about some experiences. We've had our experiences, and why don't you go over that again? Talk
Sure.
about some of the things that you've seen.
Well, I'll talk about one thing that I would like the audience to know, and I will be sending out an email today or tomorrow to my FAIR membership and sharing that with FAIR National as well. And that is just Monday, this happened in our Board of Ed, well, actually Friday. So I had a Board of Ed member reach out to me and say, do you know anything about these books? It was just, it was like a whole list of books. And I'm very close with all of our Board of Education members, Democrats as well as Republicans.
do
It doesn't
that?
matter.
Wait a second,
It's a
you're-
small town.
Okay, you're in a special category. I know some other people have trouble even getting to first base with them, right, Dave? Yeah.
Well, I think, for me, because I've always been an advocate, so it's not like I'm not new to coming to Board of Ed meetings, right? So it's not like I'm not perceived as a fad, and I don't have kids in the school system.
Okay,
So it makes
right.
it easier for me to be
Yes.
dispassionate
Right.
on occasion, because
Yeah.
I get very upset about these things sometimes, and I do lose it like other parents. And
You and me both.
yeah, sometimes I might seem like a raving lunatic, because when something's damaging any child, it feels very personal. But anyway, so what this past Friday we were talking about something else. She said, "Hey, by the way, do you know any of these books? Do you know what this means?" So I said, "Well, I don't know." She was telling me over the phone. And basically, it was like Adventures High Plus, and then it was Middle High Plus. These very generic names. And I said, "Well, I don't know. Well, just send it to me." So she sent me this list, and I immediately emailed her back and said, "Well, first of all, whoever wrote that list, if these are book titles, they need to go back to school and realize how to write them, because they were lowercase, and they weren't like, it looked like maybe they were categories at first, because it would be like middle high, or mystery high plus,
Okay.
adventure high plus, like all of these weird kind of, they didn't
But
seem
it's
like
an actual
titles.
title to a book.
Well, what happened was, as I started to go around looking and Googling things and whatnot, it turns out that those are book bundles. And those are the books, every single one of those titles. When I finally got to the website,
Right.
the bundles were maybe 10 to 14 books in each bundle. And they were, none of them had been, were older than 2020, so they were all new, all brand
see.
new titles. And in their own content description, they talk about all kinds of, race, gender, lesbian, homophobia, Islamophobia, like all of the racism, anti-racist. There's Kendi's book was compiled in there, and I realized that what's happening is that the librarians that are choosing the books have realized, oh no, we're being stopped. Like parents are onto us, so they don't put the titles out there like anti-racist baby, right? They're not going
Okay.
to put that on the pay this list.
I see. Okay.
So they're coding it in these weird ways, and then the manufacturers are not. I guess the Library Guild is putting them under these generic titles so that you can get the books in. So everyone out there, please be aware if
Wow.
you see, and it doesn't say bundle, it doesn't say group. You have to actually, Google around. I'll get the links for you to send
Yes.
people right there. You can put it in the comments or in the show notes. But anyway, so this was it was shocking. And frankly, it was shocking, I think, to including our superintendent. As our Board of Ed member, I had done a whole write-up on it. I just got rolling on it. She didn't even intend for me to do that. I said, I'll get back to you. Because I was furious, I was like, this is deception. This is actually deceiving the Board of Ed intentionally.
Nothing new.
Intentionally.
Nothing new.
I think that is new. I don't think,
Oh.
I mean, because they've put
You
books
say
through
Marxism,
before.
I say deception.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
But I have not seen in our board, we have a tiny little town. We only have 11,000 people. We only have 1,300 kids in our whole district. It's a tiny little school system. So to see that level of deception, I was flabbergasted. I was very disturbed, and so was the Board of Ed. And none of those, incidentally, both, not all sides, but like we had the votes, even though we were not in the majority at the time. We are now. Because and by we I say Republican, and by Republican I mean people that have common sense. I mean, we could talk about my politics, which I had been centrist. I was Democrat for 40 years.
What?
And yes, indeed.
Wait a second.
That's
You're
right.
going to have to edit that.
I am the
no,
enemy.
I'm just kidding.
I was the enemy. I would describe myself probably as a classical liberal.
Okay.
And I thought at one time that I was for open borders. That was because I had done work in third world countries as an optician, and I understood some of the serious, like we think people here have problems. Like, I mean, it was astonishing to see the poverty in the mountains of the Dominican, for instance. There's not running water. It just goes on and on. So I thought, wow, like we are a rich country. We can take these people in. So I had very liberal ideas, and then the left turned it up, showed me what I thought I believed in, and wow, I mean, I was very naive in my thinking, I think, for many years, and I am very conservative. I mean, that was kind of growing, but like the things that I would hold on to is like, well, I still think I'm for open borders, for instance, believe it or not. That was one thing that I was holding on to. I'm like, I can get behind that, until what happened with our borders. And now I'm like, that is not what I meant by open borders. I meant when there were legitimate people that wanted a better life, we should allow them to come here.
Well, we have provisions.
And,
You can make
it's
asylum.
very difficult. My brother-in-law is
not
from
so
Iran.
sure.
My ex-brother-in-law now.
Yeah.
He's from Iran, and the whole process of all of it. I mean, even just becoming a citizen, he knows more about the United States than I did because he had to study for the test, right? So, which I think is completely reasonable, and we should have people do that because that actually makes them better citizens, and also it means they're going to be able to succeed if they can study and understand it, and then get those answers correct. I think that's admission. That's like you've passed the SAT for the United States or something. But anyway, so I guess we went into politics just because I wanted to say on my board, I ran as a Republican. I did not run for Board of Ed. I feel like I'm much more effective on the outside looking in than I am in the middle of that.
Okay.
But I value those relationships on both sides of the aisle. I think it's important to have an open dialogue. We had a very, very bright but very, very left or liberal woman on our Board of Ed that did not run again. I could, on some things, we could have conversations where she knew where I was at least coming from, right? She disagreed. But we could do that in a respectful manner, and that was...
Just to ask, if you made to her the argument that equity is really mediocrity, would she get it?
I'd like to think so, because I feel like really smart people do get this. They just feel guilty. So if she could get over her guilt, she's intellectually capable of understanding that equity is not the way.
Interesting.
So I think
I'm going to note, we need to talk about this later. Okay. And this is going to result in at least one or several articles that focus on this very point that you're making. It's not a point that I've heard many people talk about, but I think you've touched a nerve, and it needs to be laid open.
Well, I've not successful done that with this particular individual. I just would like to think that. I don't know.
I think you're up from my experiences. I mean, what you're saying to me, it's resonating with me. I'm kind of going, wow, you know something? You might be right there.
Yeah, I think also, like I have family members that are quite liberal, and I want to be able to interact with them, and so I have to sometimes agree to disagree. But they're very smart also, and sometimes I think they're being lazy. So that's the other thing.
Okay.
So if you're intellectually lazy and you don't really want to understand and you just want to be with the cool kids, like there's some sort of like, there's also like, depending on where they live, if you're living in Connecticut even, and you're very liberal and all of your friends are liberal, it's very hard to recognize, to see that, because it puts you on the outside, and then once they do see it, it's very hard to unsee it, right? So
so that said, I mean, that, all right, so your board has a majority of people who are like you, but you're still dealing with those who are not like-minded, but you have relationships with them.
Yes.
So
well, she didn't run again, so now we have one person, and I think she is, we'll see. The jury's out. I think she's misguided. I don't think she really is following what's happening. I don't think she really totally gets
I'm under
it.
the impression that with the position you're in here now with this board, that you would be able to keep feeding them information, studies, research, facts.
They'll listen.
And they'll listen, they'll look, and somewhere along the way the ship begins to turn when they realize, wait a second, we were going in the wrong direction.
I hope so. That's the goal. I mean, we just had, in August, they presented an absolutely insane, left-leaning, like right out of the CRT book, equity and inclusivity plan.
Yeah.
And the blowback that they got for even presenting it, I think gave them pause. What I fear is that behind the scenes it's being implemented, but it never even came to a vote.
That's right.
Because they knew they didn't have the votes based on the public outcry. And
okay, so then this becomes the other challenge. If they're doing this stuff behind our backs, what are we supposed to do?
Well, I think this is something I would love to talk about this. Now, this gets into the nuts and bolts of what I try to do all the time. I think every parent that is watching this, or grandparent, or even just citizen, if you have any contact with the school system, my approach is know your neighbor. Like, you have to know, I know my neighbors very well. I mean, I live in a rural setting, so like when the cows get out or their horses get out, I gotta be like, hey, or go knock on the door. We really know each other pretty well.
Okay.
Also, I have people that I disagree with right across the way, but we still, they'll still help me if my car battery dies or whatever. So you have to learn to be, first see humanity in each of these people, even if you disagree. So I always start from that point of view.
Right.
And some of these people, it's very hard to see their humanity when they're screaming things in your face and they're got all their gear on, and there's so much hate coming from them. And we have people in our community like that too, a small percentage.
So, and their agenda is, I mean, are they so, what's the word I'm looking for, so absorbed in these ideas that you and I recognize as wrong, that's the only way they can handle it?
I think they're empaths that have been shanghaied. I think these are very, these are extremely empathetic women, generally.
Okay.
That have over-identified with the plight of trans, with the plight of people of color, to cover everybody. Right?
What you're talking about.
And so they believe it in their soul, but they're not thinking it all the way through. They're not thinking about, how is this person going to function moving forward? They're not thinking about, what if we're wrong? They're not, they just really want to help. And
that's-
you know,
I think you identified an extremely important quote subtype, psycho-emotional subtype. Yes.
yeah, the empaths are
Yes.
killing me, and I'm one of them. That's why I recognize my fellow people. I mean, I am a bleeding heart. My family used to say, you know, some people take in stray animals, you take in stray humans. And that is absolutely the truth. Like, I have had so many different kinds of people live with me and my family
Yeah.
because they had no place else to go. And it's just always been my way. My dad always said, even though he was divorced a couple of times, the one thing he told me is you always have a roof over your head. That's all I could promise. But and I always felt like, okay, I'm always going to have a roof. And my uncle, who was a schizophrenic and a very talented poet, he finally, at my wedding actually, he seemed super normal. And I was like, man, Uncle Bobby, you seem so great. And he's like, you know, it's amazing what will happen when your house stops moving. So he was homeless for a long time. By his own will or his own mental health issues, he was homeless, right? So he was traveling around, and he had this umbrella he loved and adored, and he would sort of, he was couch surfing well before that was a thing.
You see.
But anyway, so I think because as an empathetic person that has accidentally over-empathized and sometimes put my own children in a bad situation, given them bad examples, and then realized like, ooh, whoops, I should not have done that. Like, I need to prioritize my family, and then I can help people. Perhaps I can help them from a distance. I've had to work through my own over-empathizing and I just see exactly, these are very good people, mostly. And that's why they are so righteous in the way that they approach everything, because in their core, they not only do they feel guilty because maybe they didn't have those bad things happen, but they're putting themselves in the shoes of that person, and they're heartbroken over it, over things that maybe shouldn't be attributed to one or the other. And I think breaking through that cycle of over-empathizing, and really we can use that. Like, understanding that an empathetic person can be really valuable in this if you help them to see the future. What is this going to look like for this person 5, 10, 15? Because they're just thinking about right now, but they're going to kill themselves if they don't have this book. If they're going to kill themselves over a book, we have a much bigger problem. Think about what you're saying. You have to break it down, and you have to be very patient. And I don't think it's an easy thing to do unless you do what we did in our town, which is we just swept the board. We have a 5-2 ratio, and these are not, these are very, very powerful, I would say, fearless leaders that we've put in these seats in our Board of Education, and they will get to the bottom of this stuff. Like, I really have a lot of confidence in them, and so some of them have that little tiny little bit of empathy. Others might need a little help with that, but I think it's important that we kind of direct people in that way. Anyway, what I try to do is know everybody. So the person you're dropping off your kid to, you know, in the drop-off line, if you drive your kid to school, for instance, it's good to say hello, good morning to them. Yes, that's true. But I'm going to sound like a stalker now, but anybody that interacts with my kid,
Yes.
I do a social media search for them.
Oh, I see. Well,
Like dance
right.
instructor,
Sure.
coffee shop, where they're working, their after school jobs. I know
Okay.
those people. My children know that I know those people. I tell them, you better check their social media because you know I'm gonna. Like, we're very open about what kind of dangers can be around them. And, you know, maybe that makes them a little paranoid. Mostly they just like, all right, whatever, mom.
Yeah,
You know, they're ignoring
okay.
me to some extent, but also they understand that there are people that seem really well-meaning, but they're making decisions and pushing them in ways that are not good for anyone. I mean, so anyway, I think knowing, and then the teachers are the same. You have to know those teachers, and the teachers should know you. You know, trying to get your foot. We have to get parents back in the school building. That is a main objective.
So, with the 5 minutes, let's. The one thing I want to get off the table here is, well, before that, you're going down a path which is the best way to end this interview, which is basically calls to action for parents, things you need to do. But See, the reason I need to ask this other question is because I cannot report the same success in Killingworth with respect to the Board of Election campaign. And my first thought is the Republican Party in Killingworth. They are a weak, feckless, spineless, incompetent collection of individuals that have the audacity to call themselves Republicans.
Wow.
Okay, so can you say the same thing about your Republicans up in Stafford Springs? Or is it a well-organized, well-run group, that's focused, knows how to get the job done?
Well, my strategy was, and always is, if you want a job done properly, you better do it yourself. So what I did was, when I saw the Afghanistan withdrawal, my brother is a veteran. I'm part of the VFW auxiliary. I've been working with veterans for many years now, more than a decade. I just walked in and said, sign me up. I'll run for whatever you want. So they put me on there, and they actually wanted me to run for first selectman. I was like, this is my first meeting. Wait a minute.
Okay, this is not a good sign.
Right. So
No.
I knew immediately,
Okay.
wow, we really have an issue here. I
Yes.
thought that was going to be a solution, but that was just like another thing that needed some help and needed
Right.
some work. And I think the people in our RTC are very well-meaning, and they kept the ship like plugging along. They kept showing up, and
okay, but
and some of them were kind of pushing back on things. But if you don't have the support and you don't know how to gather more people, you need to reach out.
I'm going to say it, poor leadership. Or to put it another way, the leadership needs to be better.
Yeah, I think that if you don't agree with what they're doing, get in there and do it better. Like, I'm not going to sit there. I don't complain. I don't want to complain about my RTC. If I don't like the way my RTC is running, guess what? Well, I better get in there, and I better volunteer, and I better make it better. The same goes with parents and the school. If you don't like what's happening in your school, you better be at those Board of Education meetings. You better be at the parent conferences. You better be, you know what I mean? Like, these are things that we all need to participate in. And I think I've said this to you before. It is our fault. We took our eye off the ball. We did not pay attention.
That's right.
Even as my husband was screaming warnings at me, I was like, oh, come on, they'll be fine.
This
I
goes
didn't want to
back
see
much
it.
further. I mean,
for decades
I dated
and
to
decades.
I dated to the late 70s.
Yeah.
That's when conservatives started to take their eye off the ball on education. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say for the parents out there, like, the things to do, get to know those people for sure. Start going to your Board of Ed meetings, but immediately, one thing that you can do is at least stop the stuff that's going into your schools that are not good. Like, look at right now, the first thing that I do when we get like the backup, which is all the supporting documents. They post the agenda, then at the last minute, they tend to post the backup documents. I look at the backup documents, and the first thing that we go to now is, what are we paying? And we try to stop that. And we've been very successful in just stopping the books even getting paid for. We actually had a book get sent back last month. And this month, all of those book bundles, there probably was over 200 books that would have been in our school.
I see. So these
had we not stopped it. So they were not invoices. They were like, because they won't show you the invoices because that would be too clear. So it was like, oh, well, we want approval for these books for the library. They're just to replace some other books.
Right. Okay.
But they didn't give us titles.
Yeah.
So I would say look at the incoming, and at least you can stop that. And then you can move further on.
Yeah.
Into
I mean, we on the council are still fleshing out, a full-bodied approach to these problems. We've got a ways to go, but that is certainly, a key point.
Well, also, I think like we're trying to fix everything with one letter, right? Like just your letter, for instance, like stop doing this. Yes, we need to say that. That's important. But the way to move the needle is to pick something very specific. Like these general ideas of, we don't want CRT, we don't want DEI, we don't want this, we don't want that. Tell us what you do want, or break it down, right? Like I specifically focused on, in our plan, I called out a program that they were intending to use, that it currently has a lawsuit that's being waged against it in Evanston, Illinois. And I said, as a liability to the school district, I absolutely object to this. And here's the case law, and here's where it is, and here are the laws that you're breaking if you bring this into our district. And they actually, not in the meeting,
Okay.
but at the next meeting
Please
said,
send us that information.
I'll do that.
Evanston,
I'll do
yes.
that. So FAIR actually has a lot of this stuff on their website. If you become a member, even if you don't become a member, you can look through the website and you can see the cases that they have. I don't think that we're representing, I think, I forgot what law group is representing that particular group. It's a teacher suing the school for this use of this particular thing. And there are other districts that are using it right now here in Connecticut. But it depends on how they're using it. Like if they're using it in a club, which is how they first, but also pay attention to your clubs. And I'm not talking about the Satan stuff. I'm talking about the anti-racist clubs, because they're starting to pop up as well. And they're much more understated, so nobody's really paying attention. But a lot of the stuff that they're bringing in, because maybe they didn't want to bring it into the curriculum. And I'm actually I'm much less against that, because that's a student choosing that path. I think it's divisive. I want to make sure parents understand what they're really buying into, but at least it's not mandatory. It's not in classroom time, this sort of thing. But I think, if your children spend a lot of time at the school and they're participating in clubs, I wouldn't believe your kids. My kids used, one of my kids told me they were in, I forget what club it was, but it was like a crocheting club or something. But it wasn't really a crocheting club.
Yeah.
And then she told me later that it wasn't really, my own children that I thought I could trust.
Oh,
and she said,
brother.
well, I didn't want to upset you, and I just didn't want you to think of this, and I just wanted to support my friend, and so, I didn't want her to be there by herself, and all of it made sense to me. And it was only like a month of her telling me that. And then she cracked, at their first meeting.
Okay.
She's like, it's not what it was. It's like, oh, how did it go? Did you learn some new patterns? I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so talking to your kids about those activities and asking specific details and knowing what they're learning and what they're interested in can help you first, have a better relationship with your child, but also really give you better insight into what's really happening, because kids are instinctive and they know if something's going to protect their parents. So they'll try to protect you, even though you're supposed to be protecting them, depending on the kid.
There is much to do. Maybe you'll have to come back for a second one.
There's a lot to
And
talk about.
Yes,
a whole
there
lot.
is. A lot to sort out. Thanks, Danielle.
Of course.